want to begin today with a simple question. You may be someone who's still thinking about starting a venture. You may be somewhere further along, but wherever you are in that journey, here's what I'd like you to think about as we start this conversation this morning. And now I've got to get the slides going here. Give me a moment. There we go. What do you not know about your business? In other words, what questions haven't you answered yet? Take a moment and use the chat to post some of those questions, whatever's top of mind or whatever is burning at you right now that keeps you up at night, or just what you're still curious about your own venture. Now, let's throw up a few of those questions as we get started. These are the things I really think you need to be focusing on as we have this conversation, but also as you run your business more generally. Let's give you a moment here. You're all being a little shy, but this is something that you need to stay very, very closely in touch with. If you haven't done this before, not only should you do it for a few minutes now, but you should do it on an ongoing basis. What are those unanswered questions? How do you find those answers? And then how do you keep finding them and answering more questions? I'm convinced that that is job one for any new venture. I suspect you've spent considerable time talking with friends and family, maybe potential partners or even investors, about why you think you have a wonderful idea and why you think your business will be successful. And that's all very appropriate. But it's very unlikely that you're going to have all the important questions answered in advance. There's just too many of them. What's the product? Who's the customer? What's the price? What's the business model? What's the marketing strategy? And those are just a few of the big ones. It is a constant process of answering new questions, and those questions keep popping up. But there are a great many of them when you first start, and one of the first things you need to do is acknowledge that and make sure you're not making a lot of hidden assumptions. As a 19th century comedian once said, and it's debatable exactly who said this, but you've all heard it before, it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. You want to be on the lookout for catching your own hidden assumptions. That's not to say that you shouldn't have confidence in your ideas. You should. You need to have that confidence to move forward. But no intelligent person ever started any business thinking, this is kind of a crappy idea, so I think I'll do it anyway. We all think we have good ideas, and frequently we do, but they usually need some refinement. They usually need further development. And that's really what a founder's job is. To be successful, there are a lot of things you need to figure out. And the best entrepreneurs are great figure-outers. So what I'm going to be talking about this morning is how to become a great world-class figure-outer. Now, that is about much more than just having cool ideas. And also more than having tools and strategies like lean startup and design thinking, as important as those things are. It's about getting your head in the right place. It's about your mindset. And so we're going to go a little deeper than the tools here this morning and talk about how you make some fundamental shifts about how you think about the challenges that you face. To put this another way, it's about developing your innovativeness or an innovator mindset. Before I get into how to do that, I want to share with you just a little research briefly that I've done that demonstrates how incredibly powerful this can be. Several years ago, I persuaded the good folks at the Kauffman Foundation to work with me to reach out to and assess the mindset of more than 300 diverse entrepreneurs. Now, these are people all over the country. They'd all started their businesses at about the same time and were several years in, both men and women. All kinds of businesses, everything you can think of, from lawn care services to biotech, and all degrees of success and failure, from wildly successful high-growth companies to out of business and everything in between. What I found was, let me explain what the idea was behind the research, and that was to simply take a measure of their innovativeness and compare that to their actual business outcomes. How were their ventures performing? And the results were astonishing. Those who scored highest on what I call an innovativeness index, when compared to those who scored low, had ventures that averaged 34 times as much profit, 70 times as much revenue, and employed 10 times as many people. They were dramatically more likely to be the kind of home run, high growth ventures that investors look for, and significantly less likely to fail trying. The data revealed an elite group of great figure-outers. That just the top 3% of the founders fell into that elite group of innovators. And yet their ventures created 23% of the value created by all the ventures that we studied. Among a subset of tech ventures, 4% of the founders fell into that elite group. And yet their firms created a staggering 65% of the value created by all the tech ventures. Now, it's no surprise that there are high-end outliers in business. I mean, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Airbnbs have long been there. And even in traditional industries, there always seem to be a handful of high performers that far outperform their peers. And so we certainly see that, and we see it often. The problem is trying to figure out who's likely to become those high performers. It's very difficult. The best investors get it right, maybe 1 or 2 out of 10. But this measure of innovativeness appears to be that kind of a predictor. Some of you may have seen the movie or read the book Moneyball. It's the story of the Oakland Athletics about 20 years ago now, when they were in the cellar of professional baseball, trying to get better, trying to find better talented players. But they knew they couldn't go out and compete for the stars in the league. They didn't have the budget for it. So they tried a different approach. They brought in a quantitative analyst, to look at player statistics and try and identify those hidden gems. The players that had the potential to be standout performers, but that hadn't been recognized as such yet by other teams. And so presumably they would be more available and more affordable that way. The strategy worked so well that they had a record-breaking season. And today, pretty much every team in baseball, as well as some other sports, uses very similar strategies as part of player recruiting. It works that well. It's the application of psychometrics to performance. And that's essentially what this is about as well. This is about identifying high potential innovators. But what's even more important, and I think most relevant, especially as we talk here today, is that because this is not personality, because it's mindset, it's all developable. So we're talking about how to create high potential innovators, or if you're thinking about yourself, how to become a high potential innovator. You can learn how to be an excellent figure-outer. So, briefly, what exactly is mindset? That's a term that gets tossed around a lot, frequently without being defined. There are multiple definitions for it in the research literature. So let me take just a little bit of time to explain how I'm using it here this morning. A useful analogy is the operating system on your smartphone. It functions in the background, out of sight. You barely know it's there. And yet it impacts everything that phone does. You have your own personal operating system, and it impacts everything you do. But like the operating system on your phone, it's largely invisible, even to you. You barely know it's there. And yet it impacts how you make decisions, how you behave, how you handle challenges. That operating system is your mindset. So your mindset is your assumptions and beliefs about how the world works, but at a largely subconscious level, things you probably haven't examined carefully. So you can think of it as your worldview or your personal paradigm. It's the mental models that your brain has created to help you understand the world, or what some researchers call your implicit theories. It's your theories about how the world works, but because you haven't really thought about them directly, they're simply implied by the way you behave and the way you think and the values you hold. So I'm going to give you an opportunity now to get a sense of your mindset. You see, you, as you know, can download new software on your phone to upgrade it, to solve problems and increase its capabilities. And the cool thing is you can do the same thing with your own operating system. But to do that, you need to get a grip on exactly what your mindset is. And that takes a little bit of work because it's not obvious sometimes. And then you need to know how to develop it or make the key shifts that need to be made to get there. Because if you knew already, you'd probably have already made them. So to help you get just a brief handle on your mindset, take out a sheet of paper and something to write with. And I'm going to have you fill out 4 different choices on that sheet of paper. Now, this is not anything you're going to be graded on, obviously. So just be honest with yourself. You're free to go back and change your answers if you want to. My hope is that by the time I'm done here today, some of you will want to go back and change your answers. So the first choice that I want to give you is between know and imagine. So draw a line near the top of that page and write know on the left and imagine on the right and mark the middle. When you need a solution, you're trying to choose a course of action, when you're trying to decide what you're going to do next, do you prefer to rely on your knowledge and expertise and what you know will work and will get you there? Or do you like to engage your imagination in order to invent new possibilities that you don't yet know whether they will work, but you want to find out? Those are obviously 2 different strategies. Which of those approaches do you tend to prefer? Which do you do most often? Which do you like more? I realize that's more than one question, but do your best to net that out and mark yourself somewhere on that spectrum, depending on which of those you favor and how strongly. Obviously, the further to the left you are, the more that you favor know, and the further to the right, the more you favor imagine. Now draw another line and mark the middle below that. And the next choice is between apply on the left and explore on the right. When you're acting on your ideas, you do that intending to execute a plan that you know will work, that you're applying practices that have worked for you in the past. You're doing things that you know how to do. You're applying your expertise. Or do you like to explore and experiment with possibilities in order to find out whether they will work or not when you take action? What are you usually doing? What do you like to do? What do you try and create opportunities for? Which of those strategies? Mark yourself along that spectrum. Now, draw a third line, mark it the same way. This time, it's between validate on the left and challenge on the right. What this is about is how you go out and observe the world around you and make sense of what's going on, and especially how you note the consequences of your own actions. When you have attempted to do something, for example, are you looking for validation that you got it right, that it worked, that you're successful? Or is it your goal to get the most accurate information you can, to get the clearest take on that reality, even if it tells you you're wrong or that you failed? Which do you tend to look for? Which do you emphasize more when you make those kinds of observations? And we have one more of these. So draw one more line. And this time the choice is between reinforce and discover. When you're making sense of that data, of the information you've gathered, of what you observe, are you striving to reinforce your values and beliefs and the way you think the world is? Or are you actively looking for an opportunity to discover new insights and perhaps understand the world in some new way that may even contradict what you currently believe to be true? Which are you preferring and which are you most often doing? Now, these 4 choices are important, so hold on to this. We're going to come back to it. What I've just done is I've had you indicate very briefly here which of a couple of simple intuitive patterns you tend to favor, and therefore which of those patterns probably dominate your mindset. These 2 patterns describe how you interact with the world generally, how you experience the world around you, and each of them prompts a different way of thinking about that, and therefore of thinking about how you run your business and how you launch a venture. I refer to one of these patterns, this sort of give and take between you and the larger realities around you, as detect and correct. Whenever you see something that isn't the way you think it should be, your impulse is to correct it. It could be anything from a broken dish to a political opinion you don't agree with to a marketing plan that isn't getting the results you want. We've all been conditioned to do this throughout our lives. It's how our parents raised us when they told us not to hit little brother and to close the door behind us. It's how we got through school, getting the right answers on the test, and how you may have learned to play a sport or a musical instrument. In business, it's how the vast majority of business managers spend most of their time, making sure business processes are followed or people are doing their jobs. Doing what they're told and correcting their mistakes is how most people keep their jobs. This pattern shows up in all sorts of ways. It's how you keep your car in your lane when you drive down the highway, and how NASA keeps satellites in the proper orbit and Mars Explorer missions on course across millions of miles of space. It's how your cell phone holds a call. Without this dynamic, your cell phone wouldn't work. And we even see this pattern in society. It's the criminal justice system we use to discourage behaviors we don't want people to engage in. It's what you do when you vote to change the government because you don't like the way it works or the way it's being run. When you follow this pattern, you start with what you know, because obviously you have to know how things are supposed to be before you can correct them. Then you apply that to whatever challenges you encounter, looking for validation that it turned out the way you thought it would, which you take as reinforcement of the knowledge that you started with, and you repeat. And it makes perfect sense to do this. When this cycle dominates your mindset, it prompts you to correct anything that deviates from your prior knowledge and your expectations. And it has some unfortunate side effects in that respect, because it also does a wonderful job of keeping you doing whatever it is you're already doing. There's no off-ramp, which is why I call this status quo cycle. And it shouldn't be too hard to see how that might interfere with your ability to innovate. When you're innovating, you're pretty much by definition trying something new and different, something that takes you beyond what you already know. Doing that requires a different pattern. And this pattern I call explore and discover. Again, it's that dynamic of how you generally interact with the world. But instead of starting with what you know and seeking validation and reinforcement, this pattern prompts you to ask questions, invent possibilities, and learn new things. Innovation requires that you think in ways that are in many respects the opposite of the status quo cycle. You still need to get the job done, and that may involve some detect and correct, and that's fine. But you don't want it to become your dominant mindset. You don't want that to become your first impulse in how you react to things. With this pattern, instead of starting with what you know, you imagine new possibilities. Then instead of applying what you already know will work, you explore and experiment in order to find out. Then instead of seeking validation, you challenge yourself to get the most accurate take on things so you can adjust and respond. And then instead of seeking reinforcement, you give yourself an opportunity to discover new insights, some new understanding. We tend to think of innovation as changing what's out there, but to a great degree, the first step is changing what's up here, your own perceptions of the world around you. That's how you gain the insights that lead to great new ideas. That's where I think the real heavy lifting of innovation occurs, in your own head. So you ask yourself, how can I better understand the challenges I face in order to meet those challenges in new and better ways? I call this the innovation cycle, and it's the universal pattern that all types of innovation follow. It's the core dynamic of every innovation methodology that's ever been invented. And there are quite a few of them, and they can all be mapped onto this same pattern. They do it in somewhat different ways with different objectives, but they all fit. This is the essence of innovation. Innovation is innovation is innovation, in my thinking. Not that there aren't important distinctions between a startup and a new product inside an established company, but in some very fundamental ways, you're doing the same thing. Adopting this as your mindset predisposes you to be innovative and therefore more effective as an entrepreneur. When you want to be a great figure-outer, this is your killer app. So the status quo cycle takes you from know to apply, to validate, to reinforce, and back to know again, which, if you haven't already noticed, tracks down the left side of those choices I had you fill out. The innovation cycle takes you from imagine to explore, to challenge, to discover, and back again, which tracks down the right side. So you can tell very quickly which of these patterns overall you're tending to favor, partly because they so closely mirror each other. And so you can look at this and this is informal. This isn't a real rigorous assessment, but it should give you a sense of where your preferences put you, and therefore what kind of adjustments you may want to make to move more towards that innovation cycle, or more strongly, or whatever is appropriate for you. Now, your choices may vary in each of these different areas, but they tend to move together. They tend to move towards or away from either of these patterns as a group, generally speaking, when you look at the data. Most of the time, you make these choices without thinking about it. But as you learn to recognize them, you gain the ability to make that an active choice. And again, because this is not personality, it's mindset, you can choose to put yourself wherever you want to be along that spectrum. And you can move around if you want. You can make adjustments that will make you more effective as an innovator and entrepreneur. The goal is not to stop doing detect and correct. That can still be a powerful strategy. And it's not about abandoning your knowledge. Your knowledge still has great value. But you need to elevate that innovation cycle so that you're always willing to reevaluate your knowledge, always looking for alternatives and improvements and options, always exploring new ways to do things. The research with entrepreneurs found that those who most strongly favor that innovation cycle created far more value. So as you shift to an innovator mindset, you're increasing the likelihood that you'll be successful. I mean, let's face it, what you're doing is risky, and you know that. And the odds aren't real good. The numbers vary depending on who you talk to, but according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, only about half of all new ventures make it to the 5-year mark. They survive that long. That's the same odds as flipping a coin. And not all of those are thriving. They may just be surviving. That's not a real warm, fuzzy feeling to realize that you face those prospects. And as I said earlier, everybody thinks they've got a wonderful idea. But this is about not just trying to overcome those odds, but by shifting your mindset, you can make the odds more favorable. You can make it easier on yourself. It's kind of like the hot and cold game you played as a kid. When you had some secret object that you were trying to guide someone to, and when they got closer to it, you told them they were getting hotter, and when they moved away from it, you told them they were getting colder until they found it. In a sense, you can do the same thing with yourself and your team. As you watch what they do and you become increasingly aware of these patterns and gain the ability to recognize them, you can get a sense of whether you're doing things that are making you more innovation friendly or more innovation resistant, almost on a moment by moment basis. And making your way around the innovation cycle isn't doing just one thing well. It's a sequence of activities that you need to complete. This is a continual process that you repeat over and over as you face challenges and advance your understanding of things, as you figure things out. So let's break down that process for you a little bit. The choice you made between know and imagine is about how creative you are. Now, the value of this should be obvious. Entrepreneurs come up with great new ideas, and they score high on their ability to engage their imagination. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. They generate new options for themselves and so on. If what you already know was enough, somebody's probably already done it. But being creative isn't just having a knack for it or having good tools. It's a function of your mindset, and therefore it is something you can develop. You can definitely increase your creativity. This is also knowing how to overcome some of the limitations that your knowledge can at times put on you. When you get to attach to that knowledge, you start looking at all ideas through that lens. And any idea, whether it's yours or someone else's, that isn't consistent with what you already know gets rejected. Now, that's not illogical, but it tends to throw out the good with the bad. And so the people who are the most expert and the most experienced in any field are usually not the innovators, because they know really, really well how to do things the way they're being done now, not necessarily how to do them better. A more effective approach is to use all that knowledge as a source of possibilities, as options to explore, rather than using that knowledge as a test or a filter or some threshold that must be passed, because that keeps taking you back to what you already know. The next choice between apply and explore is about how brave you are, how willing you are to take risks. This is a risky lifestyle that you've chosen. There are uncertainties, and you need to be willing to face up to that, but not by pretending they're not there, but by moving forward thoughtfully and experimentally in order to navigate those uncertainties in ways that start answering those questions. You need the confidence to act, and at the same time, the humility that recognizes, yeah, you could fail, and you may need to adjust. And the sooner you figure that out, the better. Successful entrepreneurs have a bias for action, but it's not just pushing. It's that exploring and experimenting in order to figure out how to have the impact you want to have. That choice between validate and challenge is about how aware you are. As an entrepreneur, you need to be aware of your environment. You can't respond to what you don't know or don't understand. You need to be disciplined about observing what's going on. What are your customers telling you? What are your competitors doing? What's the state of the art with your technology? And on and on and on. This is also about noting the consequences of your own actions and actively seeking negative feedback. So you learn as quickly as possible what's not working, and therefore you can respond to that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful, looking for that kind of validation. But when that becomes the primary thing you look for, you risk falling into confirmation bias and start seeing things that you want to see instead of what's real. And that can be a very costly mistake. And then that choice between reinforce and discover is about how open you are. Are you actively striving to seek to understand the world in new ways that are different from the way you understand it now? Are you open to the observations and opinions of others? Do you welcome that input? Do you welcome constructive feedback and healthy debate? I'm hard pressed to think of anything in business that's more valuable than a great new insight. When you realize something that your competitors don't realize yet, or you see something in your customers that they don't see in themselves. That's very, very powerful. That's how you gain competitive advantage. And it's how you generate relevant, promising ideas about what to do next. Make seeking insight something you do actively and continually. This choice also determines how coachable and collaborative you are, and frequently how easy or difficult you are to get along with. To be an effective innovator, each of these steps is crucial. And yet, missing one or more of them is so common, they create familiar stereotypes. For example, when you fail to engage your imagination, someone who just doesn't really feel a need to be imaginative risks becoming a curmudgeon, where they not only don't come up with great ideas of their own, they don't respect anybody else's. They don't have the imagination to see the potential in other people's ideas. So everything gets shot down. When you're not willing to explore and experiment, you risk becoming the dreamer. You've got all these creative ideas. They're just vaporware because you're not pursuing them. You're not actively testing and exploring them to find out if they're as good as you think they are. When you're not challenging yourself to really build your awareness, you risk becoming the starving artist or the struggling inventor. You've done all this work. You've been creative. You created a product, but you haven't bothered to connect it effectively to the marketplace, to people who care and are willing to pay for it. And that's fatal. It's extremely important that you actively find those connections, what we call market fit, right? And then when you're not seeking to discover new insights and new ways to understand things, you risk becoming the know-it-all. Yeah, I already know what it means. You don't need to tell me. Let's just make a decision and move on. But you keep circling back to the same assumptions and beliefs, the same guidelines, the same expertise. It doesn't take you anywhere new. So being creative and brave and aware and open is not like picking up a set of tools. It's habits that you need to develop, the habits of an innovator. And you do that by first becoming aware of these patterns, and then by observing them in yourself and others, perhaps on your team, and then by practicing them over time until they become part of your mindset. As an entrepreneur, you've chosen a path that requires the innovation cycle, but your mindset may not have caught up yet. So I want to help you align the way you think with your objectives. If you're someone trying to launch a business, you already have a lot on your plate. I get it. And personal development seems like that's just not high on the list right now. But your greatest asset or deficit is yourself. And so you need to be investing in that. You need to put time and resources into the things that really matter. And one of those things is you. Developing an innovator mindset makes you a great figure-outer, and being a great figure-outer will make you more likely to be successful as an entrepreneur. The best figure-outers win. I hope you're finding this helpful. There's a lot to this. I do very lengthy workshops on this at times, and I've developed a training curriculum around it. So there's a lot more I could talk about, but I hope you've gotten the gist of it. I hope you've gotten a sense of this and the value of it, and gotten a few takeaways for yourself. The full Innovator Mindset Assessment, which is available online, is something that measures you across 12 dimensions, including your behaviors, your values, your beliefs, and provides a 20-page report, including some very detailed feedback on exactly what kind of shifts you may want to make, depending on where you are now and where you need to go. There's also some self-paced e-learning available. So if any of that interests any of you, just drop me a note at the email address on your screen there, info@innovatormindset.com, and I'll get back to you. We can even set up a time to talk if you like. My work doesn't allow me to do much coaching and consulting, so don't worry, I'm not going to try and recruit you as a client, but I'd be happy to help you access these resources. It's funny, I must have hit something that you guys aren't used to doing, because I'm not seeing many questions up here in the chat, and that's all right, but that really is something I would urge you to think about. Let me go over to the Q&A. I haven't even peeked at it yet. No, you're not there either. And that's all right. I've given you plenty to think about. If you have any questions, or anyone just wants to unmute and talk briefly, that's fine. As you might have gathered, I'm big on feedback. So I always enjoy hearing what your comments are, what your questions are, what may or may not be clear, and whether that's now or later. I'm very accessible if you need to reach out to me. I appreciate your time this morning. And since I don't see any more questions, I think we're going to wrap up just a little bit early and let you folks move on to other events.